Welcome to the Enchoris Podcast, a podcast focused on creative cultural management. I would like to welcome the first guest, Christof Schreckenberg, a longtime friend and collaborator. And today's subject is going to be the problems of music venues in Europe, with a special focus on Munich and the situation there, as a case study that illustrates the problems that are common in most European cities. This podcast is going to be the first of a series with guests on different subjects that cover different aspects of cultural management in Europe, and it provides a window to the German cultural landscape and creative industries from a perspective of how we can approach things in a creative way, and talking with people who work in the industry, different perspectives on what makes up a very interesting landscape that doesn't have the opportunity to be illustrated outside the German border very often. A couple of words on Christof, who I would like to thank for taking the time to join us today. Christof is the head of Feldstärken GmbH, which is Field Intensity. They have a very strong focus on creative industries, second cities, and everything that you would describe as the modern creative industry and cultural industry initiatives. Christof is also the head of Creative Tide and is the author of the study this talk is going to be based on. Before I say anything, I'd like to welcome you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
It's great, and I think it's an opportunity to give a different perspective on the work we do together in this case, or the work you do, because the whole issue is really interesting, and very often a conference or a study doesn't give the opportunity to talk about details and nuances that make up a problem or a solution to a problem. Let's go directly to the focus of this talk today. To be transparent, we worked on the study for the music venues in Munich together, so I actually am pretty deep in the subject matter. Christof, let me ask you a question. Why do you think that music venues are so important for a creative city?
Well, they are somehow the pulse. You notice something happening for nightlife. I mean, we always talk about nightlife economy and so on, the surroundings. But what is the vibe? Where do you feel the life in the city that's during the night? That's beyond perhaps like, let's say, a normal bar or a restaurant, or your connection to subcultural scenes, the connection to the music scene, a vibe. I mean, where do you or young musicians, newcomers go to perform? Where do they collect their first experiences? How do you build up the whole network and the fan communities? They are surrounded different places, locations, in this case clubs or other places where you meet, where you have the opportunity to use it as an open party place or a place that might also offer people like a certain security or feeling safe while partying, etc. All these different elements float into it, and so they're an important part of the music ecosystem, of the social ecosystem of the city, of the emotional quality.
I moved to cities when I was younger based on whether you can hear good music, go to good concerts. So actually ending up and living in Cologne, that was one of the biggest parts of it. And having the feeling that you can walk to a concert or take the train to a concert and we'll be back home in 30 minutes, it kind of like, that feels home. And I think that we all, music, especially after the 90s, has been a really important part of people's lives that started in the 60s. And I think, though, that there was such, especially in the European Union, after the borders opened and the touring became easier, people don't remember that you had to go through customs. It was a complicated time until I'm not that old, but this comes from people I've talked to over the years. It's like there's a huge benefit, and Brexit made it pretty obvious, since now British bands cannot tour as much as they used to, which affects a lot in the touring circuit. So what I wanted to say, to cut it short, is that it's really beautiful to be able to go to a good restaurant, to go to a concert. That's the quality of life, and that's the benefit of living in a city compared to being in nature. And I'm saying this because one of the conclusions of our work is that basically what makes a city attractive is the quality of what it offers culturally, especially for people who work in big businesses, in software companies, in the creative industry. You cannot necessarily quantify it with direct or indirect effects financially, but it's where people want to work.
It's where people want to work, and they might not have to use it every day, but they have the opportunity to use it. The feeling that, oh, I could go to a concert tonight if I wanted to. There's a club there. There's a club scene there. Perhaps I just go have a drink there in the cafe next doors, and I meet some interesting people and so on. So the venues create a certain atmosphere around it and a certain scene that is connected professionally and culturally and socially.
So I'm going to go back to focusing on the study we did, what our partners were, and what our conclusions were, so we can actually talk about that. Would you like to explain who we did that study for?
Yeah, actually, it was we did that for the cultural department of Munich together with the culture and creative industry team. So, and we actually got a question because we did a project in Leipzig before writing a business plan for a music hub. The two of us, and when the people in Munich heard it, Olaf Kranz, who I knew before from other projects, from the culture and creative industry team, he said, hey, we need a study like this. We saw what you've done before and know how you're working. And we needed rather quickly a study about Musikspielstätten, so music venues in Munich. Would there be an opportunity that you could start and do that rather quickly? And so we quickly got into the talks about the frameworks, what they needed, and what was important for them. So there was this attempt or proposal from the Green Party and the city government, who said we have to research to see, is there a dying of clubs, the German word Clubsterben. Is this happening in Munich? We need a comparison before and after the corona crisis. We would like a current list of clubs. We want to see what is there, what are the problems there, what kind of management problems are there. What are the real points which make Munich specific in comparison to other cities, and how can we turn this into a good strategy of support which really goes on the point, really fits the needs that are formulated?
One of the things that happened in the last years is that during the corona crisis, clubs actually were really at the danger of closing, and thankfully, in most countries in Europe, there was help from the state to keep them alive. And now we're talking about how the landscape is in this post-corona crisis. And in Munich specifically, there's a huge tradition since the 60s, and it's always been a super important city for touring in Europe, because it's kind of like in between the north and the south. So a lot of touring routes used to go through München. So in the last 50 years, it's one of the most important cities in Europe to go through. And in the past years, Munich has become one of the most expensive cities to live in Europe. And here we go, focusing on the problems of gentrification in cities. So we have a situation where renting a space becomes more and more expensive, and clubs cannot find spaces to operate. Or in Munich, one of the most successful and important clubs, Harry Klein, closed. Yes. So that was kind of like an important event for the city, because you have a community, a club that actually works, and it has to close because a company bought a building. It has to be renovated. You have to move out. I don't remember. It's a hotel being made in.
It was a hotel investment in that case, yeah.
Yeah, so you see how funds and investment in a city can kill one of a very healthy community that revolves around a club, because a club is not simply a venue.
Yeah, and what was very hard point with Harry Klein is like now a lot of clubs have more and more problems with their business model, with their money coming in, and they were doing very well. So they were a very successful club, and they really couldn't continue because they didn't find an appropriate new location. And so it's very sad if you're financially successful and have a good surrounding and good feedback from your fan community, that nevertheless your venue doesn't have a future, or your club.
That's the big conclusion of our study, that basically the most important part is not that clubs close or they go extinct or not go extinct, but there's no urban planning for venues to exist even when there's new parts of a city being developed. No, there's no planning from the governments of the cities so that there are rooms where you don't get sound complaints.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say no planning, but maybe not an appropriate procedure of plannings long term to consider, like the needs of a music club. They often have things that they say, oh, we have to think in our long term perspective, city planning, we need cultural spaces. But often it's not really defined, or the distinction is made between an art studio or dance studio or theater studio and a music club, and the needs are completely different. You need to think of noise reduction from in-house from the club is not the problem, but the noise that the people make going to the club, coming out from the club, waiting in front of the door, creating like these noises. And where's the big discussion about the law according to how it is categorized, because cultural noise is not the same as industrial noise. You have all these discussions going on that regulations need to be changed, or like the classification of clubs as cultural spaces and not like purely entertainment places and being put in the same category as a bordel or a striptease club. So this even creates difficulties when you open up a new club in an industrial areas at times. So there are a lot of limitations where actually also the national framework of national law has to be changed, which the initiative like Clubs Are Culture is working on for years, and they're trying to push it. But this is actually not just a German problem, even if it's a German law I'm quoting right now, but these problems appear for clubs all over Europe, basically.
I think that's what you're saying is really important, because basically you need a service design approach to what a club is. Like, how do people get there? Is there public transportation? Can people park? Which they can't in most cities. So the whole discussion should be about how do you help a club be sustainable, or a music venue, not simply based on noise regulations, but from a complete holistic perspective of what that service design means. Like, how does a person get to a club, get into a club, out of the club? What's the time? What is there a curfew?
Yeah, the things is you need a good set of instruments also for city government and long-term planning. So, I mean, there are you have very nice papers and concepts like from the International Leipzig Charter for integrated city development planning. So in German, integrierte Stadtentwicklungsplanung.
People from other countries are going to love the quote.
Yeah.
You can make really long words in German.
Yeah, long and complicated and specific and bureaucratic and whatever. But the thing behind it is you have to have a look from sustainability, service-oriented from a lot of sides, but also with the service, what do the clubs as businesses and as social spaces really need, and not to see them as opponents, to see them as partners. I think a lot of city governments still see clubs as a space that can create problems. And then you have like some quotes, and we'll not forget the first time when we heard in our interviews from one of the club owners who said, well, we're actually the organizers of the night. We are partners. We want to be seen as partners on eyesight level, so that we see how can we deal with problems, look at things, offer good opportunities for people and be taken serious for this. That was one thing that Corona has showed us. in a lot of spaces, like in Cologne, for example, at carnival time when the clubs were closed, there were heavy problems in the inner city area near the place I live, Luxemburger Straße, and so on. So crowds that the police couldn't control anymore. The same was in München, at Türkenstraße, at other places. And so if the places and the clubs aren't there, you have other problems. You have more illegal parties, like I think also London is something that's happening with a lot of clubs closing, that they really notice more illegal raves or non-official parties with risks, with follow-up costs, like people create dirt, people might get hurt. You might have follow-up costs, which the economist in me would say Opportunitätskosten. These
Opportunity
are the
costs.
Opportunity costs. That's right. Opportunity costs who appear and that could be saved. So you have to take this into consideration. It's very hard to calculate how high these costs are exactly, but the factors are clear. And you want to have some other things in the city. You want to have safe places. You want to have people who feel secure, and you can try to make everything safe by regulations or with flexible use of life quality issues, which have to do with this, who makes the whole system more flexible and more elastic in a certain way in reacting to each other.
One thing I realized and I found fantastic in the Munich club scene is to what a degree they take care for people's safety.
Yep.
And as a parent, the most important thing is, where are your children at night? And clubs provide a safe space instead of an uncontrolled rave in the middle of nowhere. And there's always going to be illegal raves, and a lot of club owners used to run raves 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. It's an important part of people need space to express themselves.
It belongs to the culture. It belongs to the electronic music culture, or a lot of different other kinds of events or music cultures that you don't do everything officially. You have like this. I mean, when I was a lot younger, I don't want to quote what we all did, but the thing is, you don't want to do anything or everything official. But you have also the opportunity that you say, hey, I want to be safe when I go out partying at night. And for example, what they have accomplished, and that was a collaboration of, for example, Harry Klein with other clubs together with the competence team for creative industries in Munich, with a local app developer. They developed the SafeNow app, and we both didn't realize how good the quality of this app until we talked to one of the club owners who said we use it, and it actually shows you very quickly if a woman has that app installed and she's on the toilet on the last cabin on the left, and she gets a problem with somebody and she puts the alarm, then our doorkeeper, our security people at the door see a woman in the last cabin in the women's toilet has a problem. They can see it according to the square meter, and they can be there in 30 seconds. And this kind of description, how they use it, or they also use it in the surrounding of the entrance if there's any problem. So this is an issue where you say, well, this is a good example for a good collaboration of clubs with people from creative industries locally. Reacting on a social need for security and being aware of it, that this is a quality issue for the people coming in. If they see it as that, if you don't want to install the app, you don't.
To give people context, there is a lot of apps for women in domestic violence situation. This is a similar concept where you enter the club and you have this application on your phone, and that's, if you press it, someone knows where you are in the club and comes to save you. So the bouncers are trained to use the app, and the app also extends in the surroundings of the club. So you're also safe while leaving the club, which kind of shows the degree to which clubs take the responsibility for even policing people's safety in the perimeter of the club, which they're not legally obliged to. So this is a very good example to see how serious that is. That when you send your 20-year-old kid who studies in Munich to a club, there's a lot of thought put into how is this person going to stay safe.
yeah, this is one opportunity. I think the likelihood to use that app would be a bit lower, for example, in the area of Leipzig-Konnewitz, where there's a completely different scene where people would take more distance to the police. But I think, believe me, with the people we were in contact with in the Leipzig scene, they were thinking very much about the safety of the people and the connection of their network and their community, and how they create awareness and emergency structures or patterns, how to behave. But it's important that these issues fit to the place and the mentality of the community around.
Even in a squad or an illegal rave, very often the organizers are a community looking after each other. So there is awareness that when you have a crowd of people anywhere, many things can happen. So safety is a really important concern for everyone involved. For me, it's interesting to talk about, and the issue is so complicated and interesting that we should just free flow through the points.
Yeah, it's also maybe some aspect what we didn't realize before when we did the study. I mean, we started with first interviews with the city partners, and also especially the local association of cultural presenters, VDMK, and their director David Boppert, and there was a very intensive exchange when we talked about how do we have to categorize the different clubs, where are the real needs, and when we tested our interview questions and structure that we gave, and we had like 9 interviews, and we really had to get into the people's understanding, or I think the club owners had to see, okay, these guys, they know what they're talking about, we can talk to them. And in the end, we had almost 200 pages prescription or text from the interviews. So there were a lot of information and side information and a lot of things that helped us to interpret the data that we're coming up with, or the conclusions that we made, so that we had a good feeling that we would the reading between the lines that we were doing that might lead to the right conclusions. Let's put it like that.
To give our audience context, what we did was a series of confidential interviews with club owners and music venue owners about the problems ranging from bureaucratic stuff to drug prevention and safety for women and awareness. And this was a very interesting series of interviews that led to a survey that was conducted online, where a lot of clubs answered. We're going to go into that data in a minute.
Yeah.
But the important thing was that we tried to bring the clubs and the music venues together with the city and the politicians. And we had kind of like an intermediate position where we independently researched the issue and tried to create some facts for those two groups of people to come together and start talking about sustainable solutions. So the city needs to regulate, is a more bureaucratic institution, but there is a lot of awareness also in the cultural sector of the city about the problems of the clubs and their worth. And on the other side, the club owners know the problems of clubs inside out. And they've been fighting for 20, 30 years. There's an initiative in Germany to define them as cultural spaces, which has already happened in France, for example.
Yeah, it's the initiative Clubs Are Culture, and it's run by the German Lifecom Association and other partners.
There's a very interesting study that they released last year that I'm going to put in the blog. So if you follow the podcast online, you're going to find the information. And that was a first monitoring attempt of what the landscape looks like. And we did a specific deeper dive into what Munich looks like. And at the moment, there's a lot of studies performed German-wide for all the people watching outside Germany to kind of really understand the extent of what that cultural landscape looks like.
Yeah, there's also been this national study about music venues, which was published in 2021, and which also gave us a kind of a framework, but we also saw where it has to be further developed with doing more fine tuning with different terms, asking constructive questions how we can develop it further and deeper, though it fits to creative industry statistics and so on. But this was a good way of orientation. And for example, this study came up to the fact that they said, well, Munich is the city with the highest density of clubs in Germany, with the highest concentration considering the population. So that was a kind of surprise. And another surprise, when I went there first, that was beginning of January, and they still had an exhibition about nightlife in Munich starting in the 50s with the jazz clubs and going through the whole history with concert presentations and clubs and the role in nightlife, which was very impressive, with a great catalog, which also helped us a lot to understand the history and mentality and development of the subcultural scenes and the club scene in Munich, which is a kind of interesting reflection. But what was missing was really like, what is the current list? How are they categorized? And when you analyze the data that was there, you saw like, from which perspective are we looking at it? For example, like a presenter or something at a public office who offers culture, they look at venues like, they have a list saying, well, in which venue could we do which kind of event? They don't look at the way of like, is it privately owned? Is it public? Is it run on a profit basis or on a non-profit basis? How do we have to categorize it statistically so that it fits to the creative industry statistics, which was our task in a way to structure it from different perspectives.
So the idea was to basically also show what the business model of those clubs are and the music venues, so people can understand that how the business model they run by affects their existence.
Yeah, and what creates the problems that a lot of clubs have at this point. And so it was, of course, we came to some conclusions which other clubs had as well, but maybe before we get into that, so we were lucky. I mean, we identified 153 music venues on different, and categorized, like also this federal study did, that we categorized them in with a smaller one that we say music bars. We have art spaces and off spaces who do performances occasionally. We have then real clubs with a certain size, which we can call music clubs and venues. But we also have concert halls, which partly can be rented and don't have technical equipment in there, so that you have these different categories, and we enhance the levels of sizes. But the general studies, or our focus, was also on clubs with a maximum of 2,000. Of an audience of 2,000 people, and who do a minimum 24 live concerts or DJ sets from artistic DJs per year. So this is like the framework we were investigating.
There's a huge trend in the music industry that people focus only on mega events in the past years as the only thing that makes money. I'm talking about Coldplay, Taylor Swift, things that fill stadium. And what we're talking mainly here is the Grassroots clubs, where all those artists started. There's this famous thing that happened in Munich that Adele actually recreated the small bar she used to perform in England in her huge event.
Yep.
And artists of that scale might have awareness, or Coldplay, for example, keeps a part of their proceeds for the sustainability of local small music venues when they tour in England. There's a lot of info and cases, but it's very important to keep those spaces alive and to help DJs, newcomer bands find an audience, because not everybody can start with 500 people attending.
Yeah, and it's also like what are the findings? What we found out there actually correspond very much to other findings on a national or European level, but with different local specifications. But I mean, it was quite interesting when you say we discovered 153 music venues, and we had our online an online survey, and 48 of them took part, and 43 filled out all the questions, so that we have something to analyze, which is a very good rate of people answering.
Yeah.
But still, it's not something which is statistically viable at those parts, but we could draw a lot out of it. For example, I mean, the main part of the people, when we ask them, what's your highest risk and worry for the future, they would turn out, the highest risk or worry that we have is bureaucracy. And that comes before in inflation, but the rising costs are the next part. And also like that the behavior of the people, of the visitors, has changed, like the consumption behavior. There's a cost of living crisis in a lot of European cities. Of course, Munich is very expensive. People spend so much on their rent, on and other things for daily life, that they don't have money anymore to go to the club, especially when they're students. And all these is a competition to the existing clubs. And then there's a new, what all club owners told us, like there's a completely new generation after Corona, from the young people 18 to 21 or maybe 25, and there we are completely different before. And they said, well, there was a completely new generation of young people in front of the door, which we first did not understand, and we have started to understand them, but not completely. They're a lot different, and now it shows European-wide. When you read studies and reactions, people say, hey, there's a younger generation, they consume less alcohol. This hits the business model of a lot of clubs. A lot of people give very short-term notice if they want to come to a concert or not. So the pre-sales on tickets or the reservations, that comes very, very late. So the data for reliable planning are not there anymore. So a lot of things make the reality and the practical planning for clubs more difficult. And then on the other hand, the musicians, they don't have the income from record sales anymore. So they have to make more from the money coming in through concert. That puts the musicians and the DJs under pressure, but also their agencies. So if a young artist has shown that there might be a market chance for him, the rates for him to perform go up, the performance fee goes up very quickly. And if you're a club who builds out newcomers, who builds them up and supports them, you lose the opportunity to also raise your profits with their profits. It's like they jump up and all of a sudden you hired a person, and 1 year later you can't afford anymore to book him or book her. And this is a tendency which we've heard from Munich clubs, that this puts them under heavy pressure and problems. And you will hear that from a lot of sites, from also internationally.
Sorry for interrupting you. They basically cannot afford the people they help build up.
Yes.
So, and their venue is not big enough to have a profit margin.
And that's the point where we are, like, who has the biggest problem? I mean, this may be also an idea how you could focus supportive strategies for giving support to clubs. The clubs that are hurt the most are the smaller clubs, not the real big ones, who have a curated program and who do a lot for newcomers. So actually that comes pretty close to the British definition of grassroots music venues.
There's also in London, there's been clubs closing in waves over the past 20 years, also because of gentrification and a lot of property being bought and then used for big supermarkets, hotels. So that's a global problem at the moment. But what is being lost is a venue for people to start their music career. So in Munich specifically, what I found really interesting is how aware the community of the club owners is. They've discussed special ticketing policies. One of the strategies was to give people the opportunity to pay a minimum, no questions asked. So people with a lower income can actually enter the venue. So imagine going to the door and you can decide what ticket you want to pay based on an ethical dilemma.
Yeah, it's a fair ticketing system, and actually that was the Harry Klein that started with it, but they got the idea again from a Berlin club, and then also other clubs like the Rote Sonne, the Red Sun in Munich, they go on doing this. Since the Harry Klein doesn't exist anymore, but they also have this model, and they said we recently installed it, and some people play a cheap ticket, and others say we buy the fair ticket, we pay more. When we were a bit younger, we didn't have money. We were happy that we could come in for this and that price. And what was interesting for me that they said specifically, we don't check on the door if the people have a student card or anything with their ID, or if it's true what they tell us. We just trust them, and it seems to work.
That fair use is unbelievable. That people are actually honest, and people are willing to pay the normal ticket instead of going for the cheaper ticket. So there's no misuse of that, which I think is really interesting when you look at the data they shared with us, that most people won't misuse this. And then you see how a fair ticketing system can actually work if there's a community.
It would be interesting to investigate a little bit deeper this kind of solidarity or social control mechanism behind it that makes it work, that you can let it loose and trust your community in that sense.
I think that reminds me a lot of people who go and buy a couple CDs from bands after a show where the tickets was cheap. So I think people always gravitate towards respect, and when you're broke, you're broke. So it's also okay to get in and watch the show, because it has social value. But I think the important and the beauty of it is that fair use makes something like that viable. And here it becomes interesting. When does the city or the state step in? For example, in Germany, there's an initiative where young people get money to buy cinema tickets, because most people do not go to cinema now with streaming.
Or any cultural
event.
Or any cultural event ticket, yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, the effects of the whole quarantine on young people, we heard stories from club owners that children who were 18 and could enter a club had no awareness from their teens of how it was to party and be there in the first years after Corona opened. And it took some effort to get those people educated, because club culture is a lot about solidarity, awareness, inclusion, and you had people coming out of an isolation state.
Yes, and it was like we had to teach young people or kids, yeah, how to behave in a club, how you talk to people, how you flirt, how you go through a crowded club without banging your shoulder every second on someone else, and so he spills his drink or something like that. And you have like this community thing, like when when some of your friends who may be a bit older take you to the club the first time, and you got like introduced to the rules somehow, and there was a new generation that didn't have all this introduction. So, and then you see what kind is missing there, and all the problems coming along with that. And I think that has balanced out, but it showed a real difference, and there are also different needs. Or like some of the club owners said, yeah, there are some behaviors of the younger generation makes our life more difficult, but it's also interesting because we see that there's something like solidarity or some values for the younger people that the generations 10 years before did not have. Felt for us more selfish. They seem to be more socially aware in other aspects. So we don't really have understood it completely yet. But the fact is that this kind of new generation and also their consumption behavior gives them problems, because they have some clubs have pretty good crowd of audience, so they're full, but they have left money in their income every night. So there are some severe business problems for clubs they have to deal with, and also in this not too easy situation around us right now, and people are scared. There's a high inflation rates and so on. How are we dealing with that? And it's a question of also a rediscussion what parts of our nightlife do we consider as an important part of the culture offer of our city, to make the city more attractive, also to make it more secure, maybe to make it attractive for tourists to come in, or perhaps even more for the people living there and the life qualities. And how do we want to make it attractive for people to come here and live here and work here, where we have a shortage of well-trained professionals in different economic fields. And and like, for example, if there's a company like, let's say, if it's Google or Apple or Microsoft or anybody else, I think I've mentioned enough names now.
In
They
Munich,
want the crowd to have like a nightlife that is attractive to their young programmers or people or so on.
Munich has become a very important city for software giants. And basically, one of the things that a city has to offer to engineers, software engineers, coders, designers is you need to have a quality of life after work.
Yep.
And part of what the club's association makes as a point is that the indirect improvement of the quality of life that the music scene provides is far more important than the financial benefits of it. So you can't compare 100 clubs to a huge multinational company, because very often politicians want to see direct effects, how much money, how many jobs that creates. That's also a very important part, because it's a biotope in which creatives live, but it also improves a city's attractiveness and quality beyond what anybody can imagine. Imagine a city where you don't have restaurants and music venues. What are you going to do?
Yeah, and also the creative industry surrounding or the scene, or the creative ecosystem around it. And when you talk to club owners and they said, yeah, of course we have a collaboration with young designers or artists who hang our paintings here. We give opportunities for exhibition, or the young fashion designer, and he who also loves to come to the club, so he belongs to the community. And then we give him the opportunity to do photo shootings in the club. When they are at the non-business hours, to use the location and to help them to come into the market. And we have an exchange of things, maybe small win-win situations and networks, so that the clubs have also the chance to be an anchor point in a creative milieu around it. And these are the aspects which are not that easily to bring into economic numbers.
You can't quantify how a network of people, of creatives, stimulates a scene. And if you look at any creative scene, from what happened in Berlin with techno, what happened in London with the underground scene, you can't quantify how that happened. You can see the results on a global scale eventually, but you cannot quantify how those 10 little clubs made a huge difference.
No, you can try to make a social network analysis and to combine it to business relationships. So we ask questions like, how often did you rent out your club, for example, for photo sessions, for film production, for any other kind of events and so on, so that you try to visualize the connections and the stakeholders. But the quantification, economic quantification, is really difficult. And the question is, do you really want to spend a lot of money and time on research where you don't have clear results? Or do you say, hey, we want to invest into a process, into like little pilot projects or examples where you see like the city is vibrant, it doesn't cost us a fortune, but we get quite something out of it. And this is also a question when you talk about survival of clubs. How important is it? What are the costs that are created if the clubs are not there anymore? We mentioned it, like with illegal parties and the consequences of that, just as one example. And and how much money is needed to support as support for the club so that they can survive. It might not be huge sums if you have a smaller program funding so that they can book some DJs regularly or some newcomers and so on. It doesn't have to be very expensive, but maybe this is a lot cheaper than other costs that occurs that occur when the clubs or the music venues have to be closed. So it's hard to make this comparison, but it can't be a pure economic comparison.
In one of the interviews, we realized that when the clubs were closed during Corona, there were a lot of street problems and parties and illegal raves that caused far more problems than anybody could imagine. So I think for people who don't understand the importance of nightlife because they don't live that lifestyle, young people will always need a venue to express themselves, mingle, fall in love, flirt, break laws. But the thing is, a club is a much more controlled entity, and people have a far better experience than actually a party on the street that's completely unregulated.
Yeah, and the step is a bit more thinking just about clubs closing or staying alive. It's also like which kind of new generations of venues might come up. I mean, in Munich before Corona, we had, I think, the moderator of the night representative of the city told us that they had around 40 sound collectives. Mm-hmm. Above, roughly. And afterwards, it was something between 120 and 140. Wow. Not all of them having the attempt to become professionals, but it has grown a lot. And where are the club owners of the future come from? And it's always been a thing that it was the same for me. I started to work at a festival, and then you have run your own events, and they come from the sound collectives, from festivals, from the surrounding of fan communities for clubs, and then they try to start their own thing. But the problem is nowadays, I mean, like 30 years ago, I mean, you didn't need like that much knowledge about economy to start running a club, or not that amount of money. Especially music, especially Munich, it has become very expensive. So when we looked at the clubs closing down and opening up, we saw like you need more money than before, much more money to open up a club. So the social dynamic to found a club out of subcultural connections or scenes and building something up in an empty old industrial building to make it work has become more and more difficult and unlikely. So this is also a point about it. How about the social flexibility to give people the opportunity to grow into their own business, to form it. So this is also something we have to really think about also with formal processes. And this is also, well, of course, in Leipzig, this is a different situation than in Munich. Munich, we had the situation that the people told us also from the Association of the Music Presenters. They said, hey, Munich has a problem. Munich is too clean and too organized, and there's no space anymore where you can create something like that. And this is the problem what we identified also.
It's over-regulated, and it's also really limited by gentrification. So it's not like there's room for someone to spontaneously rent something in the middle of the city. It won't get permissions. It's a whole bureaucratic process to get a club running. And those processes should be there for people's safety and in order for a society to function. But the point is, what do we do when there's no room for new things to start? For me, one of the most important things I realized about club culture is that a venue that has been established at a certain location, the location is equally important to the legacy of the club. For example, a club could close, the owners could switch, but it's really important not to lose the venues and the free spaces in a city, because it's very hard to rebuild and find an alternative. So the urban planning and the gentrification does not allow for an easy substitution of a space.
Well, something like how Charles Landry has formulated it last week at the German Creative Economy Summit. And he said, when you're planning, I mean, he's a very famous international city planner. And he said, when you do city planning, you always have to be aware of that you're leaving like empty spots of planning in the city maps so that there can still something happen there, that there's something can develop there that is not fully developed. With Munich, everything has been developed, and it becomes more and more. Berlin becomes more and more like that, and so on. So we have to be aware of the fact that these places that can become something else become more and more rare, and to rethink our way of city planning in that respect. That's definite.
That is something that the club owners also wanted and the scene, more free rooms for projects to experiment for limited time usage with a different set of regulation. For example, you use an old industrial warehouse for a festival without having to go through the whole procedure of building a club and then seeing if that can grow into something. So the point is, how do legislators, the city, and the club owners find spaces for things to happen, which is how creative economy should work. Like what you said, there has to be a biotope where there's room for organic growth and new species to develop, and you can't just regulate it like a glass house.
No, you need different tools and a good mix, a good combination of it. It's also when you have like temporary use of buildings or old buildings, and it's part of the process of gentrification, probably, then in most cases. But you also have to take into consideration it's a lot of work. It's in the end, it's rather expensive for the people when they went in. When they go out again, when you have the local community who supports it, like for the official part, for the bureaucrats who are involved in it, it's also a lot of work. So you have to find the right combination of it, but you have to test it out individually in every city, even though the problems are the same. But you need like a test fields to check it out and to balance it out with the work that has to be done. But on the other hand, you have to be aware of that the danger for a lot of clubs, they don't make such huge profits. So the balance, or for them to keep alive, they are under high risk. And that's why we identified within our study, where we would say, well, with a lot of clubs, if it goes on like that, it's a kind of high alert, how long they can stay alive. On the other hand, we found that what's surprising when we analyzed the numbers between 2019 and 2024, that we had 14 clubs closing and 11 clubs of new openings. So when we said, okay, that doesn't look like Clubsterben or clubs dying, but we just analyzed this period. It also shows that the national funding programs to save clubs, they worked. That's also what the associations and the club owners told us. Without the programs, we wouldn't have survived. So that worked. But it doesn't mean that it's going to go on working like that in the future. So there's a lack of spaces. Founding new spaces becomes more expensive. And you see that also in the new clubs that were founded, that there's more capital behind them, more investment. And these are different points you have to deal with, and to be really aware that the situation is serious, even if the numbers don't show it right away.
That's also part of the politics, that it's a very political issue, and people want to oversimplify it as clubs are dying, and the numbers there's no extinction. But if you look at something like London, a huge percentage of the grassroots music venues closed.
It happened in London and all over England. I think around 400 all over England that closed within a few years, so in a short period of time.
So I think we shouldn't limit the conversation to are clubs dying or not. There's a problem. And those are very important parts of the music ecosystem and the quality of life in a city. So we should not make it like a political argument, are clubs dying or not? There's a problem. And clubs have different business models. Inflation alone is enough to kill any business.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I think in Amsterdam there's a new study that started like demanding more what are the needs of the people who goes to clubs, especially the younger generations. How should the venues of the futures look, maybe to develop it in this direction, to keep it a bit more dynamic and not so static, to see like in which direction are we going now, which is the new maybe the new philosophy of focus that we should address, how we deal with the needs and the mentalities also of the younger generations in connection to not only city developments, to like also development in rural areas and so on, where clubs or music venues play a bit, the mechanisms are a bit different, put it that way.
I think I'm realizing how broad the issue is. And I think we should follow up with a second podcast on the issue in the future, because I think it's not given for people how important it is to have a city vibrant with music venues and clubs. I think it's really important to shed some light on all those aspects. If we focus on Munich, what was your biggest takeaway from analyzing the scene there?
For me, it was like this one aspect that I underestimated what had already been done in Munich, what different attempts they made to solve problems, where I think they're far ahead in comparison to a lot of other cities. I wouldn't have expected that. And the issue that stays in my head where one of the club managers from Pasha formulated it when he said, we are the organizers of the night. We want to be partners, and we should think about how we can develop new opportunities and strategies together.
The solidarity of the club owners with each other and their community is also really interesting, how they help each other and how Corona brought people together.
That was even actually an essential part for Munich, because they said we wouldn't have expected that, but it was creating a big solidarity under the club owners, which might not be the same in every other city. So that might be a specific strength of Munich, that not all of them, but quite a number of club owners were very like solidaric with supporting each other. Where do you find a funding program? How do you solve this quarantine problem? And so on and so on and so on. This is something that we heard from different sources, which also gives you impression, there's also like a kind of kind of solidaric strategy or something
like that. A think tank of club owners trying to find solutions. And most people, one of the surprising things that most people wouldn't think about is that most clubs actually need one person to work on applications and bureaucratic stuff full time. So procurement pure. So it's really surprising to what an extent the whole running a club has become more like a startup.
Yes, definitely. Also with the financial needs involved. When you think about it, what it costs to install, like starting with the sound system and sound isolation and the good quality, but plus all the other needs that need to be done and followed. So when you talk about creative industries, often you have I worked with a lot of artists and also performing arts like theater and so on. And then you work with people and you say, well, they're good artists, but they don't have the hand for being businessmen so much, like the professionalism at that point. And most of the club owners that are out there for a few years and survive with the club, they're real professionals and they really know how to run it and they know their business. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it so far. So you have to take their professionalism serious.
Most of those people could run a normal business better than bureaucrats. That's my experience. But that's a personal opinion. Christof, what were your recommendations to the city? What do the clubs need, and what do you think needs to get done to support them in this rough patch we're in?
Well, there are different aspects, and one part is what could be done rather quickly. I mean, the bureaucratic part, we had that. So how can you work on certain bureaucratic regulations to make them more easy? For example, if you want to switch from your license of being just someone who sells drinks or food, as we call it in German, Schankgaststätte, to get then the license as a club. And they said it's almost important to get that. And you see that when you have a lot of clubs who maybe do 22 or 23 live performances a year, and they would like to do more. This is the limit for when you need a club license. So to think about that, how can we make that more easy? Or just counting what is an event or not. Because if you do a reading with an author in a club, that's also already an event. It's not even a concert. So can we be more flexible there? So that would raise the opportunities for music bars to make more events, other aspects. There were some programs where you said it would be good to support also the festival, to include festivals, festival funding, but they also already have been raising some parts there. The closing curfew times at night, to take them completely away. That was an aspect. Or some rather easy thing, if a Catholic country like Bavaria would decide to change the Tanzverbot, which is you're not allowed to do dance events at certain holidays, which are called the serious holidays, when people are moaning about the people who died in the war, etc., the Volkstrauertag and other things. I think there are 4 holidays on the weekend where you can't really make events. And if they would loosen that, like other countries or federal countries in Germany do, then they would already have 4 more days, which can create quite some profit in the calendar. These are some simple
more than 4 days.
More than 4 days.
So imagine having a business, and if you have 40 days a year where you can really make profit, and someone takes 10 out of those.
Yeah.
So it's that practical, but it's also a matter of religion and respect and community. But the thing is, from a survival perspective, that's 25 or 20% of how those clubs make their money to survive as businesses. So we have to decide as a society if we want to treat them as businesses, which means we create a huge problem for them, or if we want to treat them like NGOs who can survive anything, which is not the case.
Yeah. Or another part that we had was that we looked at some examples for clubs and said we have this problems that clubs are of gentrification, that clubs are pushed out, and that is a national thing that the national law should work on it, like the agent of change principle, that if for example, a hotel is built next to a club, and they say, okay, we built a new hotel here, but now the club is bothering us, it's too loud, so they have to move. That you say, no, the investor of that new building is responsible for the fact that he has to invest into sound isolation in his building and inform the people living there or coming to the hotel that there's a club next door, and they have to live with it. That this is one issue which needs changes on the national law.
To put it simple, if the club was there first and you build up an investment next to it, the club does not have to go, but you actually have to make planning and measures to keep some things alive. So it's basically a real estate problem.
Yeah.
And it's also a problem of ethics.
That's right.
So to explain what agent of principle is, because it's not a legal trick. It's actually, imagine if you had a school and the school has to leave because next to it you're building something that is not compatible to a school. So
Yeah.
I think we have to look at our cities as a living organism, and you don't take the heart of it out.
That's important, and to be able to do that, we had mentioned that before. You basically need the clubs on the city map for planning, which means you need a cadastral register where the clubs are registered as cultural locations, and everyone who wants to build something in the area has to go through the application process in the city, and they have to check when they give permission to build. They have to check, is there a club nearby, and is that cleared? Yeah, so you have to make it a part of the planning processes when you put it into like new constructions of real estate, etc. So even if we say we need less bureaucracy, at that point we need a little bit more, because it saves a lot of work that might come behind it if you don't have it.
Well, legislation becomes bureaucracy once the awareness about the spirit of the law is lost, and then people play with nuances and legal tricks. Like, for example, there's clubs that have one person suing them for years when there's 25,000 around the building that don't complain. And we're talking not about complaints about a club being loud, but complaints about a club being... people complain about people walking back home from the club in the morning and being loud.
Yeah.
And the same people would not complain if the football stadium was emptying.
Yeah, or the people who don't like in their neighborhood just sue the club again and again, even knowing that they have no chance of winning, but it causes trouble, and it causes a lot of nerves and energy for the club owners. And after maybe 10 years, people are just so fed up and say, like, we just want to leave, or we don't have the energy anymore to go on. So this partly is the case. But one aspect that we also said is, with all these problems there with the gentrification and unappropriate new locations, also like you can also try to get creative ways of creating incentives for good facility management, or different kind of facility management for clubs. For example, we had it with the Rote Sonne and the Pascha, that they were located in an area of several buildings that belongs to an insurance company, and they said, well, people are in their offices during the day, not at night. We like it when there are two music clubs within our buildings, so it doesn't bother us. So it's good that the clubs are in there. We think it's positive for our image. It connects with the office, it doesn't hurt each other, so this works. Perhaps you can try to create more incentives in that direction to use these kind of opportunities. That were some parts that we had. There were so many recommendations that we did.
We'll add a link to a presentation so people can read the details. I think the discussion and the emotions about it are more interesting, what we're talking about. It's very hard to remember a 100-page document by heart, and I think the spirit of it is that you have to give people incentive to support clubs and music venues, and it shouldn't only be state-sponsored, but you have to give people who own buildings, who plan buildings, also incentives to include concepts like that.
Yep.
And I think that improves the quality of a city immensely. What was your biggest personal takeaway from visiting clubs after Corona, and what is special about München and Munich?
My personal takeaway, let me take it like that. Great experience was simply, as someone who loves good music and sound, was like to go to the Blitz in the evening and enjoy the sound quality in that club and the atmosphere with the people. And I'm usually not a fan of techno or electronic music, but just to go with the flow, and say like, hey, this is kind of strong experience, and the passion behind it that we found with every club owner that we interviewed, with different shapes and forms, but to do that, certain things in your life when you think you have to do that no matter what. And I didn't have the feeling that any one of that people did it just for money.
Not at all. I think the devotion and the personal expression through it and the sense of community and improving the life in the city is extreme. So the people are really devoted to what they do. And
well, at least with the people we talked to. We didn't talk to anybody, but quite a number of people. But we could sense that very much in the way.
Well, in any sample, you'll have a very complicated mix of people.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna follow up this one. I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you for your invitation.
And I think people will provide some links and interesting materials that you can read at the Enchoris blog and on social media promoting this podcast. I want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening. Thank you for starting this one off as the first guest. And we'll follow up soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.